Hi, I'm your host Vasco Duarte. Welcome to the Scrum Master Toolbox podcast, where we share tips and tricks from Scrum Masters around the world. Every day, we bring you inspiring answers to important questions that all Scrum Masters face day after day. Hello everybody, welcome to the Wednesday Leading Change episode this week with Sofia Katsaouni. Hey Sofia, welcome back.
Hello Vasco, good to be here.
So Sofia, today is Wednesday and as usual we talk about change because change is, after all, the constant in the work that we do as Scrum Masters and Agile coaches. Most of the things we do have to do with improvement, therefore change. Some would say that change is the only constant, which I think is a very well constructed, witty sentence. And because of that, we need to learn how to live with it, how to learn to do change and change leadership in our work. So tell us a story of a change process you were involved with. And then as you go through the story, step by step, highlight for us the things you took away that you still use today. Could be tools, could be some techniques, some tips that you took from that story that you still apply today.
Awesome, thank you. So one of these processes or change process that I worked on, and at that point it was first working together with the CPO of that company at that point, was regarding OKR process. I'm sure many people have heard this before. So like every organization, there is a first time that they decide to do OKRs, right? To use this tool, basically. And it was the same in this organization I was working at. And basically, at some point after I had mentioned multiple times to the CPO at that point that it would be very valuable if we have some wider goals that every team can align on, and so that we are heading all in the same direction. And then the teams can derive from there how they can contribute, right? So they can then set their goals and stuff like that. Then basically we decided, when he was also more open to it, to create an OKR process. One thing that we did that I would have done differently now is that we did this in the product area. So we didn't do OKRs in the whole company. So we did it more in the OKR, in the product engineering organization. So obviously, as you can imagine, this created a bit of some separation, right? So that was not a great idea. But it was a starting point, let's put it that way. So we decided that, and basically we decided it very shortly before an OKR starting point would make sense, a quarter, let's put it that way, right? Because the OKRs are quarterly, like every 3 months. And we kind of rushed through it. So it was me and him basically working on this and developing like, okay, how can it look like? Who do we involve? How do we bring this to the teams? How can we bring some education as well, right? So it's the first time. How do we even set objectives? What good objectives look like? How do we set key results? How do these good ones look like? And then, of course, him also working on the strategy together with the VPs to actually set these product engineering area goals so that we can bring them to the teams, right? So how we did that was he was working on those things a lot on the product aspect of things, right? And the direction and creating this guidance together with the VPs. And then we were collaborating together on how can we bring this to the area. So what is the context of the why, for example, we want to do such an OKR process, right? We wanted to bring focus to the whole area. So we're all heading in the same direction. We wanted to bring clarity to the teams, but also give them empowerment and ownership on then setting their own goals of how they can contribute to this bigger picture, right? And also setting a situation in which the teams also could see how they're achieving things over time, with, of course, the option of if we realize a month later that a goal doesn't make sense anymore, we can always remove it, right? So there is always this reflection aspect that we were enabling. And how we did that more concretely, also what I was working on a lot was creating templates that the teams could use. So we were using, for example, tools like Miro or Mural, stuff like that. So I was creating templates that the teams can use for their own sessions, that they would create such their own goals, right, with all the relevant material there. And also creating spaces for the teams to discuss, right, or for the people to discuss. So we had actually an open space, a 1 hour open space every morning of that week or 10 days that we were going through this transition, so that people can come and ask questions, right? So that they would bring up topic like, oh, I don't know, it's the third day, we are confused on how we can set measurable key results. Does anybody know? Let's get into a room and figure this out. 15 minutes, right? Let's get some input. So some things like that. Learnings that I got through that was basically that it does make sense to do it on a company level. It doesn't really bring the full value if you just do it in one part of the company, even if it's half the company.
Can you give an example of how that became clear to you?
I think it was because, engineering teams, product engineering teams don't just work on their own, right? Usually, very often they're in a small bubble themselves, but they, of course, need to work with the business. They, of course, need to work with sales and marketing, right? So if then we, in product engineering teams, have in our heads, okay, that's our objectives, but then there is a different idea on sales or business on what we need to work on, then there is a contradiction, right? Then there is a different interest and lack of alignment, which of course can result to conflict or many conversations on how to not have a conflict, right? So it doesn't bring actually the alignment in the company, which would be the value we would want to have, right? So this was one of the things. And I think another thing would have been that would be important to bring other people on board earlier. So we started this very much the two of us with the CPO, and then he brought in the VPs. But for example, something very valuable would be to bring the PMs on board, supporting them into knowing how to set goals that would be valuable, right? And would be also measurable and all these aspects of things. So that then we know that there are some people in every team that can also support the team, because there was not a coach in every team. We had 3 coaches supporting 3 teams each or something like that, right? So by definition, there was not someone there that could support in the process of the workshops and the working sessions the teams had. So I think educating people in advance would help the teams a lot to not get overwhelmed and not get lost on the way. And also picking more people's brain before the process. So that was a very fast change process that we went through. Of course, we learned through it, right? And then we got feedback and we improved it the next time. But I think it was a bit too much of a rush at that point.
And that's one of the risks when we know that something is important for us and we want to implement it and we want to get it done like really quickly. And then, of course, that feels like a rush and we forget important steps. One of the things for me that is important, though, is to realize that sometimes it really is important to do it quickly. And I'm curious, at that time, did you consider, for example, piloting it with a subset of teams before deploying it to the rest of the product engineering organization? Or was that something that was not considered?
No, we didn't consider it. And I think the reason might have been that then maybe we would create more separation also in the product engineering organization, but also because very often there were many teams that had dependencies from each other. So we would need to then approach it differently and say, okay, which teams have dependencies from each other, but can be independent from all others. I don't even know right now if we could find such a use case, so that then we can do it without disturbing the rest of the product. But that's a very good idea, actually, right? So how you can pilot this in a smaller scale, then see how it works.
It's always a trade-off between coverage and speed, right? Like if you want to cover the whole organization, it's going to take a long time.
Yeah.
If you want to cover a part of the organization, then it could be done potentially faster. And then the cool thing is that if you do a piloting, you can actually ask for volunteers. And that's the best way to try something out, right? Like when you have somebody who's motivated and you can go straight into practicing the whatever technique or processes, and you don't need to go through a long period of justifying and going through all of the details, but rather you just start immediately experimenting on the actual process. But it's a great story. And of course, many of the companies out there these days are applying or considering applying processes such as OKRs. It's not the only process that tries to achieve those goals that the OKR process sets, but definitely one of them. And it's a great story for those of us considering a move towards that. So thank you for sharing, Sofia.
Thank you so much.
Leading change is one of the core skills we must acquire, but it is only one of the steps towards our success as Scrum Masters. Tomorrow, on Success Thursday, we will talk about how to define success for the Scrum Master role. We'll cover tips on how to measure your way to that position, and most importantly, how to develop that focus on continuous improvement that is as important for Scrum Masters as it is for teams. See you tomorrow. We really hope you liked our show. And if you did, why not rate this podcast on Stitcher or iTunes? Share this podcast and let other Scrum Masters know about this valuable resource for their work. Remember that sharing is caring.